So yeah, buddy, basically we're looking for sticks, rocks, leaves, scat, deer, bushes, berries, anything that's going to point to signs of prime habitat. Smell that fresh air, Bill? The world is alive, William! Can you feel it? Woo! Good things are going to happen for us, I just know it. I'm talking late night talk shows, morning talk shows, internet talk shows. Billy! 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 What the hell, dude?
Hey, lighten up. All I had to do was just stop and tie my shoe.
Don't do that to me, dude!
Come on, you're being ridiculous.
It's not a joke, Bill. Hundreds of people go missing in national parks every year.
Okay, one, we are not in a national park. We're in a state park that's just a quarter mile away from the nearest police station.
It doesn't matter, Bill. That's the point last seen right there.
And two, I don't know what you think will happen or what you're afraid will actually happen, but I think you just went a little overboard with this whole Sasquatch thing. Mitch? Buddy?
I found something!
What is it? You trying to grip Mitch? Mitch?
Harry and the Hendersons on DVD.
Seriously? Where are you going?
Oh! To watch Harry and the Hendersons on DVD!
What about Bigfoot?
We found Bigfoot, Bill. He's in the movie. Whew! It was hot as balls out there. Let me tell you something. Whether you're a skeptic or a true believer, you gotta admit there's something fascinating about the wide, wide world of cryptids. You got your Mothman, your Dogmen, your Lizardmen, your Owlmen, Jersey Devils, Dover Demons, Flying Humanoids, Men in Black, the Chupacabra, and the same dinosaur that happens to live in every single lake in every single part of the world as if they were all connected by a series of underwater tunnels. The pursuit and serious inquiry into these creatures is called cryptozoology, and it's largely a pseudoscience. Basically, some guys in suits decided it's bullshit, and like anything that guys in suits decide is bullshit, it attracts all sorts of colorful characters, from the reasonable and dare I say respectable and to be taken seriously, to the insane and over the top, with most falling somewhere in between. But for most of us though, cryptids are just a curious fascination. It's the classic monster story we've told since the dawn of mankind about things that go bump in the night. So it shouldn't shock you that the bulk of cryptids are absolutely terrifying if they were ever to be by any chance real. I mean, look at this thing. You want to run into that in the middle of the night? Hell no! But thankfully for us, the vast majority of these creatures are scientifically improbable, if not impossible, to exist naturally. Once you start throwing the paranormal into there, though, it becomes a whole other can of worms. However, cryptozoology has, at a few points, identified creatures that at one time or another were considered fictional. Classic examples include giant squids and gorillas, while the most recent discovery is the billy ape deep in Africa, a large bipedal chimpanzee. Now you've probably noticed I've neglected mentioning the most famous cryptid of them all, and there's a good reason for that. Bigfoot and the other mystery hominids across the world are kind of the exception and not the rule. You see, unlike many cryptids like the Mothman, first sighted in the 1960s and never seen again, sightings and stories of Bigfoot and his bros date back much further to literal prehistory. As paleontology and anthropology unearth more and more about primates of the past, it's becoming increasingly likely that a creature like Sasquatch did exist at one point or another. Just for some perspective, what we once thought was a two-person party between us and the Neanderthals has in recent years expanded to include Denisovans and Homo floresiensis, two other similar but different hominins that we shared the planet and interacted with. So scientifically speaking, the question of could a creature like a Sasquatch have existed is already starting to get answered to a resounding yes. But the question of does Sasquatch exist Well, that's a different matter entirely, and that's the one that has really captivated the world since at least the 1960s in the Patterson-Gimlin film.
So much so, we can finally get to the real reason we're here, which is Bigfoot movies, because boy oh boy, they are an ever fascinating subject that covers a wide range of genres. Naturally, one would expect movies about big hairy monsters in the woods to be horror movies, and there are a ton of those, and they all have the laziest titles imaginable. Pick either Bigfoot or Sasquatch, put it in a phrase or just leave it alone, there's your movie title. A lot of these horror movies are awful, bad acting, bad effects, bad writing, ugh. But you can also find Bigfoot in a lot of other genres, like erotica. Yeah, I'm gonna let the cinema snob handle those. Oh, by the way, this isn't a trend that died too. There's tons of poorly written smut about this subject. Before you know it, we're gonna have squatch.com. But once you put the scares and kinkiness aside, Bigfoot shows up a lot in the family-friendly side of things too. Yeah, it turns out the big guy is big with the kids when he's not out killing park rangers or stealing our womenfolk.
So without further ado, I think it's time we met the most famous piece of family-friendly Sasquatch cinema. They should have called it Bigfoot's Big Day Out. It's Harry and the Hendersons.
As it turns out, I lied to you because this is actually a horror movie. Something ominous is brooding in the forest, lurking in the deepest parts of the brush, with only one thing on its mind. Nah, it's another bait and switch opening.
You know, come to think of it, this is the third movie in a row that I've done that has a bait and switch intro like that. And all my skits had bait and switch intros like that too. Hey, I'm not a hack, they are.
Here we meet the Henderson family wrapping up their vacation camping out in the woods of Washington. There's George Henderson, played by the always fun John Lithgow, his wife Nancy, teenage daughter Sarah, and their young son Ernie.
Come on, Nan, we gotta cook it. It's Ern's first kill.
The Hendersons are your regular, everyday, middle-of-the-road family. The dynamic between them is carried by John Lithgow's performance in this, and he's very much the main character of the movie. He really nails that family dad vibe that was so prominent in sitcoms and family dramas, and this is important because Harry and the Hendersons, while being a movie with a lot of themes, is really about what it means to be a father and doing what it takes to protect your family. We'll come back to that idea pretty frequently, but that's the meat and potatoes of the movie in plain words for you.
You're a butcher, Ernie.
Back off, Sarah. It was him or me.
With their vacation now wrapped up, the Hendersons pack their bags and hit the road, ready to leave the wilderness behind until they return next summer. We learn a little bit about the Hendersons and their personalities. George is an outdoorsy kind of guy, a real man's man. His wife Nancy, while supportive, is skeptical of raising her family around hunting and shooting. Ernie really looks up to his dad and admires the way he is, but Sarah is much more like her mother. In essence, the Hendersons are a family that is just on the verge of having a rift form between them. There's two sides that are forming here in their beginning stages, which could easily worsen to the point of an irreconcilable difference. But that's all put on the back burner for a little bit when George hits something pretty big with the car. Naturally, everyone is a little shook up. George is even afraid he hit a person at first.
Alright, I gotta call some horseshit though, cause did you see what that thing did to that car? I do not believe, not even for a fraction of a second, that in a matchup between a classic car and a 500 plus pound whatever the fuck they just hit, that the classic cars are gonna come out on top. You ever see what a car looks like after it hits a 150 pound deer? The shit gets totaled. And that's leaving out the gory mess that gets left behind.
Well, Nancy convinced George to investigate what they hit, and being concerned about what he hit, he grabs his rifle. The rifle he had told his wife prior that he didn't bring, but he maintains he took it for protection, just in case a gigantic beast wandered out of the woods and bumped his car. Alright, Nancy? Relax. He's gonna go shoot the mystery animal, and we can all go home. I mean, there's nothing to be concerned about. It is just an animal. An animal that's really big, with human-like hands.
Nan!
What?
I think you better come take a look at this.
Naturally, George calls for his family and they all observe the find. To their own shock, they go silent. The air is thick. They all know exactly what it is. They know exactly what's in front of them. But for one reason or another, they can't find the words for it. It's something they thought they'd never say in any serious context. Until Ernie breaks the silence.
What if it's him?
Who?
One thing I really like about Harry and the Hendersons is that it plays around with many of the Bigfoot encounter tropes. For example, it's such a classic Bigfoot story trait that pops up all the time from people who claim to see one when they were skeptical. They run through every explanation they can possibly think of for what they witnessed, usually starting with the ordinary, like,
My God. I thought I hit a man.
George, what is it?
I don't know. I hardly saw it. But it's got to be a bear.
before grasping at straws like,
Could it be a gorilla?
but as they continue to rule out any and every possibility, they eventually end up with, I saw something, and I cannot explain it, and I would rather not say what it was. It's just one of many nice details that honestly make this one of the better and more genuine Bigfoot movies out there.
Holy shit. Sorry, Dad.
Realizing that he may have just made the discovery of the century, and pretty sure that the Bigfoot is dead, George makes the decision that the family has to take it home with them, despite protests from his wife. And while they debate what they're gonna do with the body, it turns out the Sasquatch isn't dead after all, and he freaks the fuck out. George slams on the brakes and sends it flying. And then we pretty much repeat the last scene, beat by beat for some reason. There's some jokes, and it's a little funny, but also makes you wonder, why? George is now extra sure it's dead, and they put the creature back on the roof and hit the road. A little later, a rather ominous-looking figure makes his way through the woods as if he was back in Nam. He's actually a Bigfoot hunter. And like most Bigfoot hunters, he doesn't actually understand a damn thing about science. That's one way to contaminate your genetic sample. Good job, old chap. After a long journey, the Hendersons make it home by nightfall. How they didn't get stopped once with that thing on their roof, I have no idea. They hit the hay in order to deal with their roadkill in the morning. Unfortunately, it turns out George was wrong about the Bigfoot being dead when he wakes up during the night to find that it's missing. Hearing a noise in the kitchen, he discovers the Sasquatch raiding his fridge.
Ooh, big mistake, Buster. You can kill a man's friends, seduce a man's wife. You don't raid a man's fridge without permission.
And here is when we finally get our first clear, extended look at the Bigfoot suit. And to this day, it remains one of the best pieces of creature suits ever created for a film. Like pretty much all good creature effects, it's a complex getup of prosthetics, costuming, and puppetry. The end result is an incredibly realistic moving creature. The man in the suit is actually Kevin Peter Hall, who also played another iconic movie creature, the Predator. Harry and the Hendersons won the award for Best Makeup at the 1987 Academy Awards. It is also a fairly accurate depiction of what Bigfoot is said to look like based on sightings and reports. It comes complete with a sagittal crest, wide shoulders, swaths of matted hair everywhere but the face, hands and feet, and even includes some seldom reported things like facial hair, a broad flat nose, and deep-set eyes.
All in all, it's easily the best Bigfoot suit ever committed to film.
Anyway, all the commotion as George tries to defend himself from our rather agitated ape man wakes the rest of his family, who all come running in. Thanks to the quick thinking of his wife, the Hendersons are able to get outside to safety, while the Bigfoot is left to his own devices inside their home. And now we get to learn a little bit more about our new hairy friend. First off, despite his great strength, he's much more curious than malicious about his new surroundings. He eats plants and fish, he shows his friendly side by trying to interact with the head of a deer in the Hendersons' home, confusing it for a real creature. But once Harry realizes he's been bamboozled, and that the deer is dead, his exploration takes on a new tone as he noticeably disapproves of George's trophy hunting.
So one criticism that can be leveled against Harry and the Hendersons, and personally I think it's kind of fair, is that the movie has a very environmentalist tone to it. There's a lot of stuff in this movie that's anti-hunting, anti-gun, pro-vegetarian.
Ultimately, how you feel about that will be affected by what side of the aisle you fall on with those issues. I've seen many people both praise and condemn this movie for it. While I personally don't think it interferes with the movie in any major way, I do feel it can come on too strong and feel preachy, and is a detriment to its quality because of that. The Bigfoot sets about retrieving any dead animal in the house he can find with the intent to bury it, leading to a confrontation at gunpoint between George and Squatch. But in those moments, he finds that Harry is just too human looking, too much like him, and he cannot bring himself to shoot him. So he tries calling the police to come shoot him instead. I mean, we are in the suburbs after all. However, he's met with ridicule when he tells the sergeant straight up that Bigfoot ate his goldfish. Though to be fair, I'd probably be skeptical if someone told me that too. It does sound like a tabloid headline. Realizing that they're on their own, the Hendersons have to figure out what to do about the Bigfoot, hiding him from their nosy neighbor returning their dog.
everything all right with you kids?
Which gives us another scene that highlights some of the aforementioned impending divorce tones this family seems like it's heading towards. After getting rid of the neighbor, the Bigfoot proves that he isn't so bad after he helps Ernie get back up the collapsed basement stairs and also bonds with little Bob, the family pet. Ultimately, the question for the Hendersons comes down to if they want to return him to the wilds or try to profit off their new guest. They realize they know very little about the creature, and whatever they choose is going to be a big risk.
We don't know if it's male or female.
Definitely male.
How can you tell?
Hey, you know what they say about a guy with big feet.
Don't answer that, honey. No.
Meanwhile, our Bigfoot hunter from before is revealed to be named Jacques, a Canadian hunter who became obsessed with tracking Bigfoot, to the point that he needs to remind himself that he's not insane.
I'm not a fool. I'm not a fool.
You sure about that, bucko? Usually sane people don't need to tell themselves that. We also meet a new character, Dr. Wallace Wrightwood, a former anthropologist who now operates a Bigfoot museum. Interestingly, Dr. Wrightwood seems to have lost his conviction over the years compared to Jacques' staunch fanaticism.
Sit!
Despite teaching the Bigfoot how to sit, translating to more property damage, George can't convince his family that keeping it around is a good idea. So that night, they try to bribe him with fast food to get him in the car so they can take him back home. But Ernie is real sad about it, man. He's been the one so far who has bonded with the Bigfoot the most. But George explains to him that sometimes, in order to be a father, he has to do what's best for his family in the long run.
Harry? Since when does he have a name?
Ernie mishears George refer to the Sasquatch as Harry instead of Harry, and together, they give him a name and prepare for a heartfelt goodbye. Harry is also sad, and despite not understanding what they're saying, he's not stupid. He's able to comprehend that he's caused the family a lot of trouble, and seeing his buddy Ernie break down and cry really breaks him too. In an attempt not to inconvenience them anymore, he makes a break into the night to travel back home where he belongs.
There's only one problem to that, though. He's lost in the suburbs, and he's kind of far away. I think our friend Harry is going to find himself in a hairy situation.
George realizes this too, and he spends a portion of the night looking for Harry. Meanwhile, Harry gets into all sorts of hijinks. The next morning, after his unsuccessful search, George learns from a morning talk show that there were Bigfoot sightings in the burbs last night. But despite his protest, Nancy insists he go to work to take his mind off things for a bit. Jacques ends up using a license plate that fell off the Hendersons' vehicle. Okay, seriously, again, how did they not get stopped by anyone on the way home? They have a massive thing on their roof covered by a tarp with two big feet sticking out, and they didn't have a front license plate? No one saw this? No one reported that to the police? Well, I guess they couldn't report it to the police. It didn't have a license plate. Well, regardless, he gets their address and poses as
Richard Smith,
from a government bureau that may or may not exist. He also proceeds to bother Nancy with very strange questions about what her family hit in the road.
Alright, dude. I don't know what you were thinking was going to happen. But, what did you expect? That she was going to be like,
oh, we were just minding our own business until we had an 800-pound hairy hominoid that came from out of nowhere and took it home with us. It made a mess of our house, so we decided the best thing to do was let it loose on the neighborhood. Why do you ask? I don't know why I'm from Jersey. What is it with you Bigfoot hunters? Licking hair samples, stalking and intimidating witnesses? No wonder you bozos can't find shit after 9 seasons. Well, it's safe to say that
Richard Smith
didn't go over too well. So Jacques heads off to the gun store, which is owned by George's father. It turns out that Jacques' full name is Jacques Lefleur, and he was a pretty well-known big game hunter from Canada in his prime, until the fateful day he caught Sasquatch fever, and he's had his heart set on squatching ever since. Except he does it with guns instead of a camera crew. His success rate is pretty much the same.
I'm not a fool.
Speaking of having his heart set on squatching, George picks up every book he finds at the library about Bigfoot and takes them home. The family's a little dismayed because a lot of the books portray Sasquatches to be brutal monsters, which they know Harry isn't like, all except one book, written by a Dr. Wallace Wrightwood in an anthropological science journal. Coincidentally, this journal also has a picture of Jacques, which Nancy recognizes as
Richard Smith.
Lying bastard!
And they both realize that Jacques sort of stalked their family and obviously knows they hit a Sasquatch with their car. Well, armed with the knowledge that there are 2 guys who can at least tell him more about Bigfoot, and that one of them is probably off his rocker and incredibly dangerous, George pays a visit to Wrightwood instead. He asks the man at the counter where he can find the doctor and what it might be like if a family took a Bigfoot in and raised it like a member of his family. Wrightwood responds with basically, "Are you fucking nutso?" Well, George leaves his number and asks the man at the counter to tell Wrightwood to give him a call. Little does he know, he was talking to the real doctor all along.
Listen, in Wrightwood's defense, I think the guy has a point. You saw what Harry did to their house after one night. I don't care how good your homeowner's insurance is. Allstate does not have a Sasquatch clause. I looked it up. They don't cover that.
The next few days sees an increasingly distressed Harry lost in the burbs, trying to get back home. He has a number of different encounters which end up making the news. We also learn that George doesn't have the best relationship with his father, who disapproved of his son's interest in art and raised him to be a real man's man instead, hunting and killing. And now the one time he wants his son to use his talent is to make a big scary Bigfoot drawing to sell guns for the new Bigfoot sighting epidemic. Almost like how George wanted to profit off Harry before.
This is actually a turning point for George in the movie. Up until now, his entire focus has been being a good father and husband in the only way that he kinda knows how to be a good father and husband, which is being tough and assertive. But now he's starting to realize that he turned out just like his old man. Especially by abandoning Harry, someone who could really use his help.
It's also a touching moment because for the first time, we see George genuinely connect with his wife on an emotional level. They don't fight, they don't argue. Instead, they connect, and that slowly forming rift that was starting to show itself during the beginning of the movie starts to reverse. And George himself feels like a new man, as that night he sets out to do right, not just by himself, but by his family by finding Harry, and also doing right by Harry by helping him to get home, back to where he belongs. He actually finds Harry pretty easily in the city. So hold on. Time out. There's a Sasquatch loose in a city. It's only a few hours after rush hour. Not the Jackie Chan movie, like when everybody's on the road. And you're telling me that even after being spotted by the police, they still can't catch the Sasquatch?
You know, I take it back finding Bigfoot. When he's good, he's good. He's a ninja. He's like a regular shinobi Sasquatch. Nothing you can do about that.
Well, George finds Harry by doing some Bigfoot howls, and there's a very tense scene with Jacques and Harry in a dumpster stowed away on a garbage truck that George steals. Jacques almost kills Harry twice, but thankfully, George manages to prevent that from happening. Jacques gets picked up by the fuzz while George makes use of Harry's secret ninja techniques to get back home unseen. The Hendersons are reunited, and you can tell that George feels completely renewed in his home life. He also gets a call from Dr. Wrightwood, and George invites him to dinner. We learned from Wrightwood that since his first Sasquatch encounter, he hasn't been a good father or husband. He devoted more and more time to his search for Bigfoot to the point that it became an obsession that damaged his professional and private life. He fears the same fate might befall George. Wrightwood is a man on the cusp of breaking. He dedicated a lot of his life to something that has yielded few results. While he's warning George, he finally snaps, deciding that he spent his entire life in pursuit of a sham, insisting that there is no such thing as Bigfoot.
There are no big feet.
But just as Harry helped George realize what it means to be a father, George, by introducing Wrightwood to Harry, restores his faith in his work, giving his character resolution in the plot. Naturally, he's ecstatic about meeting a Bigfoot face to face. I'm sure it helps that he's also in a living room and not out in the middle of the woods. Unfortunately, the happy moment is short-lived, as good old Jacques Lafleur is out of the slammer and immediately heads to the Hendersons. What follows is the climax of the movie, as Jacques chases the Hendersons and Wrightwood, while they race to return Harry home before Jacques can harm him. The goodbye between them has to be short, and George knows it, but when Harry refuses to leave, bam! George snaps, reverting back to his tough persona, to make Harry go before it's too late. It'll once again be up to Harry to help George one last time, so he doesn't fall back on his old ways. The Hendersons realize that letting Harry go won't be enough, so they use Dr. Wrightwood's Bigfoot prints to make fake tracks in the snow to throw off Jacques. These tracks end up going nowhere, as Jacques finds Harry pretty easily anyway. But it turns out going toe-to-toe with a Sasquatch on his home field isn't too easy, as Harry disarms Jacques and returns to the Henderson car waiting for their return. George, thinking Harry is still in danger despite having Jacques in a headlock, attacks Jacques while raving that he was once just like him. He even tried to kill Harry before, but he realized that Harry was not an animal. And when Harry stops George from giving Jacques permanent brain damage, George realizes what he was doing and that he is not acting like the man he should be, nor like the father he ought to be. All of this was enough to finally convince Jacques that perhaps bagging a Sasquatch isn't all it's cracked up to be, as even he begins to rethink his life. It's then happy endings all around, as the Hendersons now have the time to give a heartfelt goodbye to Harry. And George thanks Harry for helping him become a better father, while Harry thanks George for helping him get home.
Never got a chance to thank you.
The Hendersons are stronger as a family than they ever were before, and as Harry walks away into the horizon, it's revealed that there were several Bigfoot on the scene, hiding in plain sight, watching them all the entire time. While cheesy, it's a quaint way of saying that not everything is what it appears to be, and sometimes something obvious might be right in front of you. It's just up to you to notice it. It's also symbolic that Harry's family is a family of 4. And while the film reuses Harry's costume for 3 out of the 4 Sasquatch, I think the intent at the end is to show that Harry is a father himself. It's no coincidence that the Hendersons are a family of 4, and that there are 4 Sasquatches at the end, including a small child. It's possible Harry was able to teach George so much because these are lessons he at one point learned for himself. Or perhaps George helped Harry learn just as much as Harry helped him. Honestly, it's up to your interpretation, but that's how I read the ending.
Now, Jocko, what for you?
I don't know. There's always Loch Ness.
I'll save the trouble on that one, Jack. It's an eel. What is it, 1987? You'll have the Chupacabra to look forward to in a few years.
And that, my friends, is Harry and the Hendersons. The story of a father who learns to love himself and his family thanks to a little help from our big hairy friend.
Personally, I like this movie, as you can probably guess. Part of it is nostalgia, but even now being older, I can appreciate it for having some deeper meaning to it beneath its surface. It's more than just a silly movie about a family that finds Bigfoot and hijinks ensues. It's a movie about a family with growing problems at home. A father struggling to be what he needs to be compared to what he's been raised to be. Being a family movie, a lot of those elements are hidden beneath the surface. But they are there, and I think the film handles them nicely. On the surface, it's a magic Sasquatch that saves the family, but even Harry is a walking metaphor for the problems in George's life. He first seeks to capitalize upon them, then feels ruined and depressed by them. However, when he decides to accept and learn from them, it's when he truly grows as a character. I see in reviews that a lot of people shame Harry and the Hendersons for being an E.T. knockoff. E.T. certainly had an effect on Harry and the Hendersons' creation in some way. Not only do the two movies share similar plot elements like a family taking in a non-human creature, but they also deal thematically with divorce, family rifts, and missing someone in your life. However, while E.T. focuses on these themes as it relates to a child affected by them, Harry and the Hendersons focuses instead on the adult side of things, with a father who must change to prevent these things from happening. I see no reason as to why both films can't exist, and I don't see E.T.'s inspiration being a detriment to Harry and the Hendersons' quality. It only appears that way if you compare the two films directly. And even then, I watched Harry and the Hendersons way more than E.T. when I was young, but that probably had more to do with liking Bigfoot over lame-o aliens anyway. At the very least, you must concede that Harry and the Hendersons is a much more soulful, genuine, and charming adventure than a real E.T. knockoff or cash grab like Mac and Me or Nuki. Lilo and Stitch borrows pretty heavily from E.T. as well, and I never hear people knock that one over it. But what I appreciate the movie for the most is as a movie about Sasquatch. Regardless of if the legendary creature exists, Harry and the Hendersons does a great job of bringing not only it to life, but also the lore surrounding it. From the excellent costume and sound design to Harry, to the eerily familiar encounters with Sasquatch told by Dr. Wrightwood and Jacques, to even the Hendersons' reactions with encountering Harry for the first time, this movie just gets what is so enthralling about the Bigfoot mystery, so enrapturing. Far better than the dime a dozen horror movies or bizarre pornos. The heart of the mystery is not that there's a bloody horn dog of a monster out there in the woods, but the fact that there might be out there a creature that, while being so similar to us, is so different than us at the same time. And Harry and the Hendersons captures this incredibly well, and I would say it is the best Bigfoot movie I have ever seen. However, there is the fact that some elements of Harry's betrayal are, and forgive the phrasing here, not very realistic. Being a vegetarian, for example, or being a supremely gentle creature despite being at the top of the food chain in his domain, Coupled with the general environmentalist worldview of this movie, including an attitude that is anti-hunting and anti-gun, it does make it feel like a movie with a bit of an agenda. Perhaps it feels more so now than ever before, living in a time where everything seems to have a blatant agenda one way or another, but I still found it hard to ignore.
But even with all those problems, Harry and the Hendersons will always hold a special place in my heart. I don't know if I'm gonna live to see the day where Sasquatch is definitively proven to exist or not exist, but being alive to experience the fun of the mystery, I'll take it. Now, if you'll excuse me, in 2020 it'll have been 2 years. That means that I got a movie to review, so I gotta go find Billy in the woods. I'll see ya. Now where did I leave that fucking mask? Alright, let's do one more. No.
Okay. One more. We'll do one more.
You want to do one more?
We'll do one more.
You still rolling?
Yep.
Alright, cool. Oh! Well, Harry and the Hendersons. As I trip and fall and die on the hill. Ready? This is the one.
Okay.
Alright, and action.
1. We are.
That was a great one.
That was a beautiful one. Sticks, leaves, anything that points to prime habitat. Right? And then you go down. Smell that fresh air. The world is alive, William. Right?
Oh, I just have to tie my shoe.
I forgot my line. Fuck.
You're supposed to do that. That's all I remember.
All right.